It started like so many disappearances do, quietly. No screams, no witnesses, no alarms. Just a girl, a trail, and a vanishing act that made the whole town question how well we ever really know the woods that surround us. Welcome to Uncommon Stories. If this story stays with you, hit subscribe and tell me where you're watching from and when the truth found you. Now let's begin. Her name was Hannah Pierce. 28 years old, a travel blogger, a weekend hiker, and the kind of person people described as fearless. She'd spent months documenting trails across the Pacific Northwest, remote forests, forgotten cabins, rivers that looked like silver ribbons cutting through nowhere. Her posts had that perfect balance of adventure and peace. The world as it should be, her followers used to say. But one morning in August 2014, Hannah uploaded a photo from a hiking trail outside Merrill Peak, Oregon. A simple image, sunlight cutting through pines, her backpack propped against a fallen log, and her caption, "One more ridge before sunset. Then I'm gone off-grid for a few days." It would be her last post. When she didn't return home 3 days later, her roommate filed a missing person report. At first, police treated it like a common misadventure. Hikers get lost, phones die, trails loop back on themselves. But something about Hannah's case felt wrong. Her car was found exactly where it should have been, parked neatly at the trailhead, keys still in ignition. Inside, her wallet, camera bag, and journal were untouched. Only her hiking pack was missing. Rescue teams scoured the ridge for a week. Dogs, drones, helicopters. They found nothing. Not a footprint. Not a torn piece of clothing. Not even the usual sign of wildlife. It was as if she had stepped into the forest, and the forest had simply kept her. The search turned national when a journalist uncovered Hannah's last GPS ping. Her phone had gone offline at 5:47 p.m., roughly half a mile off the map trail. But what caught investigators' attention was the second ping, 12 minutes later, from the same coordinates. That shouldn't have been possible. If the phone had died, it shouldn't have come back online. And yet, for a few seconds, just long enough to send one small signal, it had. Then, silence forever. Locals started telling their own versions of the story. Some said she'd fallen into an unmarked cave. Others whisper about old mining tunnels from the 1800s, forgotten shafts hidden beneath the forest floor. A few even said they'd heard her name before, tied to other disappearances around Merrill Peak. Stories the sheriff's office refused to confirm. But what no one knew then was that Hannah hadn't been alone out there. Someone had been watching her. 2 months after she vanished, a group of college students camping near Dry Hollow Creek, 12 miles from where Hannah was last seen, discovered something half buried beneath the soil, a trail camera mounted to a rotted tree trunk. At first, they thought it was a wildlife cam, the kind used by hunters to track deer, but when they took it apart, they realized it wasn't government-issued or registered. It was custom-built, homemade. The casing was rusted, but inside, the memory card was still intact. They handed it to the sheriff's department. When the footage was finally played, what they saw didn't make sense. It wasn't animals. It wasn't hikers. It was her. The camera's first frame showed Hannah walking past a lens around 3 p.m., unaware she was being filmed. The timestamp matched her last day alive. She looked calm, carrying her backpack, humming softly. Then, around 5:40 p.m., the last known time she used her phone, she appeared again, coming from the opposite direction. But this time, she wasn't walking alone. Someone was following her. At first, all you could see was movement in the far background. A tall figure, half obscured by trees, keeping perfect distance. No visible face, no sound. Just that eerie, steady presence. Every time she stopped, they stopped. When she turned, they froze. Frame by frame, the pattern continued for 47 minutes, until Hannah stopped completely, looked back over her shoulder, directly toward the camera, and said something no one could make out. She stepped forward, closer, frowning at the lens, like she just realized what it was. Then the screen flickered, and the next frame showed only the empty forest. Investigators assumed the footage was tampered with, but forensics later confirmed the file was continuous, uninterrupted. Whatever happened after that flicker wasn't cut or erased. It was never recorded, because the camera had been shut off manually. The last thing it captured was a single hand, gloved, reaching toward the lens. When police searched the area around the tree, they found 2 other cameras buried nearby. Same design, same materials. Only one of them still worked, and it had footage from earlier that week, showing Hannah arriving at the trailhead, parking her car, adjusting her gear, and that same figure in the distance, already watching. He'd been there before she even started hiking. The footage changed everything. The search expanded. The case turned from missing hiker to abduction investigation. But there was one more piece the cameras revealed, a small, subtle clue buried in the metadata of the recordings. Each video file contained a serial code with the prefix N43, L9, followed by 4 random numbers. To most, it looked meaningless, but to one retired forest ranger, it meant something chillingly specific. N43, L9 wasn't code. It was a location marker, a mapping coordinate system used only by state forestry employees, which meant whoever placed those cameras had once worked for the Park Service. By late October, detectives uncovered a name, Caleb Rowan, 42, former state forestry technician, fired in 2009 for trespassing on protected land and conducting unauthorized environmental research. He'd gone off-grid after that. No phone, no address, no trace. But there were reports. Campers had filed complaints years before Hannah disappeared about a man in camouflage who would appear near campsites at night, watching from the tree line, vanishing when confronted. No one connected it to Caleb. Not until now, when his old cabin was finally located, deep within the northern range of Merrow Peak. Officers found the remains of a crude surveillance setup, monitors, batteries, and dozens of cameras identical to the ones near Dry Hollow Creek. But the memory cards were gone, all except one, and inside that final camera was another recording, time-stamped August 19th, 2014, 5:52 p.m., the same time Hannah's phone had briefly come back online. It showed the forest again, quiet, windless. Then the faint outline of a person walking past, barefoot, carrying something heavy in their arms. The image was blurry, but you could still see her hair long, auburn, tangled with leaves. It was Hannah. The file ended 22 seconds later. The camera tilted sideways, like it had been knocked over. Then nothing. No more footage, no more pings, no more signs. The last movement in the frame wasn't hers. It was a shadow stepping across the lens, too tall to be her, too still to be human. The final second showed the outline of a face, just for a flash, before the feed cut to black. A face that wasn't recorded again. A face that was never found. The sheriff's department closed the area for investigation. They sealed off the trail, citing erosion hazards. But locals knew better. To this day, the forest around Merrow Peak stays empty. No campers, no hikers, and every few years, when the leaves start to fall and the fog rolls in, someone swears they see a light flicker in the trees, like a camera still recording, still waiting. When the video ended, silence filled the room, the kind that feels heavier than sound itself. For investigators, that final flicker, Hannah's face, the shadow, and then nothing wasn't closure. It was a beginning, because there, buried inside the digital noise of that last file, was a trail Hannah had left without meaning to. The technicians from the Oregon Bureau of Investigation spent days combing through the memory card from Caleb Rowan's cabin. Each file had fragments of data, bits of corrupted footage. But in one short burst of static, between the final seconds of Hannah's recording, something appeared that shouldn't have. A GPS overlay. Brief. Almost hidden. A coordinate code that matched no known mapping grid. But when a forensic analyst converted it to topographical data, the numbers fell perfectly across a section of forest that wasn't even on public maps. a closed section, former state property, one that had quietly changed ownership the same year Caleb Rowan disappeared. The land was now registered to a private research firm based out of Seattle, Thor Environmental Systems, a company that claimed to specialize in soil preservation and wildlife monitoring. But they had no active permits, no employees listed locally, and their listed office didn't exist. What did exist was a dirt access road leading directly into that section of woods, a road that ended abruptly in a clearing about 1.5 miles from where Hannah's camera footage was found. It wasn't on any hiking map. No ranger patrols went near it. And when the team first stepped into that clearing, it felt wrong. The ground wasn't natural. The soil was too even, too clean, like someone had covered something up. They began to dig, 6 inches beneath the surface. They hit plastic, then metal, then glass, a plastic container, sealed airtight, holding a small handheld camera, identical to the ones near Dry Hollow Creek, and on its cracked LCD screen, one frozen image. Hannah Pierce, looking straight into the lens, her expression unreadable. The footage on this camera, once restored, lasted just under 2 minutes. No audio for the first 20 seconds, just Hannah's face. Then, faintly, her voice. "Whoever you are, I know you can hear me." Her tone wasn't afraid. It was calm, defiant. "You've been following me for days. You think I don't know, but I do. I saw you last night at the Fire Road, and again this morning. I don't know what you want, but you need to stop." A long pause. Her breathing steadied. Then, softer, "If you find this camera, it means I didn't make it out, but it also means he didn't either." She leaned closer to the lens, whispering something almost lost in the wind. The audio crackled, but one word broke through. "Beneath." Then static. That single word, beneath, changed the direction of the entire case. Search teams shifted focus from the ridge trails to the ground itself, the caverns, the mines, the hidden structures beneath Merrow Peak. And there were plenty. Old maps from the late 1800s showed abandoned prospecting shafts, used briefly by early settlers before being sealed off due to collapses. Most were thought to be buried forever. But one of those shafts, marked as Site 14B, sat less than half a mile from where the GPS coordinates pointed. That's where the next discovery came. The entrance was disguised beneath a tangle of brush and roots, invisible unless you knew where to look. The first few feet were just dirt and stone. Then the tunnel opened up, wooden supports blackened by age, walls marked with claw-like gouges that didn't look natural. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply, and in the cold air, you could still smell something faint. The same metallic tang from Hannah's car. The deeper they went, the clearer it became this place hadn't been forgotten. Electrical cables still ran along the ceiling, battery lights mounted on tripods, even a working fan, its blade spinning slowly. Someone had been down there recently. 50 yards in, the tunnel split into 2 paths. One led deeper, descending toward what used to be a mining chamber. The other veered right, toward a smaller alcove filled with scattered equipment. And in that alcove, sitting on an overturned crate, was another camera, this one different. It wasn't for wildlife. It was surveillance grade, government issue. Beside it lay a torn notebook, its pages damp but still legible. The first line, written in block letters. Test Group B, observation protocols, do not engage. Beneath that, subject number 12 exhibits increased awareness of monitoring. Recommend containment or termination. There was no signature, but the date in the corner matched the week Hannah disappeared. The discovery stunned investigators. There was no official record of any government operation under Merrow Peak, but whoever wrote those notes had been logging subjects, plural, meaning Hannah might not have been the first. The last entry read simply, August 19th, final attempt. Subject near creek perimeter. Observation compromised. Cease feed. That timestamp was exactly 5:52 p.m., the moment Hannah's last ping registered. The same moment her camera flickered and went black. By now, Sheriff Alan Moore, who'd replaced Crenshaw years earlier, had seen his share of unsolved disappearances. But this one felt different. Too structured. Too precise. He ordered the entire mine cordoned off and sent the camera footage to federal analysts. The files were encrypted, unusual for off-the-shelf cameras, and the decryption key was buried deep in the metadata. When they finally cracked it, the results were almost impossible to explain. The footage wasn't just of Hannah. It showed other hikers, other nights, dozens of recordings spanning 5 years, each time-stamped, each showing people walking unaware, being watched. And in several of them, the same figure in camouflage. Tall, still, always at the edge of the frame. Caleb Rowan hadn't been filming wildlife. He'd been cataloging people. But the strangest part wasn't who was on the tapes. It was who wasn't. In every file that showed Hannah, Caleb himself never appeared. No reflection, no voice, no sign that he'd ever been the one recording, like he'd been following instructions. When investigators tracked down his last known contact, a retired biologist who'd worked with him in the 2000s, she revealed something chilling. Caleb had believed he was working for a private ecological study, monitoring human behavioral patterns in wilderness isolation. He said his employer wanted footage of hikers alone, to study how people respond to being watched. But he quit when they asked him to install audio triggers, microphones disguised as wind sensors, because he told her the voices didn't sound right. When she asked what he meant, he said something she never forgot. They sound like me, but they're not me. The more they uncovered, the deeper the story sank. Half the files from the cameras didn't even match known coordinates. They recorded from impossible angles, perspectives no person could have set, as if the cameras were moving on their own. And that wasn't paranoia. Forensic review showed multiple frames had been captured from varying elevations within seconds, different trees, different distances, with no sign of human relocation, which meant one of two things. Either Caleb had help, or something else was recording with him. By December 2014, the investigation hit a wall. The tunnels were sealed again, the cameras confiscated, and the official report labeled it inconclusive digital tampering. But Sheriff Moore didn't stop there. He knew something had been left behind in those woods. Something Hannah had seen before the end, because of that one word she whispered. Beneath, 2 months later, a maintenance crew inspecting storm damage along the Merrill Peak Service Road uncovered a narrow sinkhole less than a mile from a mine site. Inside it, embedded in the mud, was a piece of shattered glass and a small black device, an audio recorder. The serial number matched the batch used by Thorne Environmental Systems. The tape inside was short, crackled, barely audible, but near the end you could hear two voices. One, a man's hoarse, anxious. She found the feed. We have to end it. And another, softer, female. It's already recording. Then a click. Then silence. The last 3 seconds were pure static. But if you listen close, if you slow it down, you can hear something faint. A breath. A whisper. And 2 words that froze every analyst who heard them. I see you. To this day, no one knows who said it, Hannah or the one behind the camera. But when that recorder was logged into evidence, its battery still held a small charge. And according to the report, the device's indicator light was blinking faintly. Recording mode. Active. Meaning whatever said those words was still there. By early 2015, the investigation into Hannah Pierce's disappearance had all but collapsed under its own weight. The evidence didn't make sense. The cameras, the tunnels, the coordinates that led nowhere. Every piece answered one question only by creating 3 more. But one detective, Ryan Adler, refused to close the file. He'd been a rookie when the case started. Now he was its last voice. And something about those videos haunted him. It wasn't just that Hannah was being watched. It was how she was being watched. Each camera that captured her used angles no human could have positioned alone. Some looked down from impossible heights. Others seemed embedded inside trees themselves. No ladders, no marks, no sign of tampering. It was as if the forest itself had been recording her. When Adler requested access to the Thorne Environmental Archives, most of the company's data had been wiped. What little remained hinted at something deeply buried. A government grant proposal from 2008 titled Project Sylvan. Its stated goal was environmental observation, testing autonomous monitoring systems integrated into natural ecosystems. But one line in the technical appendix stood out. Subjects may demonstrate heightened awareness of surveillance over prolonged exposure. Behavioral outcomes to be observed and logged. Subjects, plural, human. That single word confirmed what Adler had already suspected. Hannah Pierce hadn't been the first or the only one. When Thorne's remaining records were traced, they pointed to a shell company, Ridgevale Research Group, registered in Denver under a single name, Dr. Martin Keene. Keene had been Thorne's lead engineer and head of Project Sylvan until his sudden resignation in 2010. After that, he disappeared. No address, no tax record, no public record of death. But buried in an old staff roster, Adler found a phone number labeled next of kin. It belonged to Eleanor Keene, Martin's sister, a retired field technician now living in Spokane. He drove there himself. Eleanor was in her 70s, soft-spoken, careful with her words. When Adler showed her a photo of Hannah, she went still. Then she said something that made him stop breathing. She looks just like the test subject he showed me. According to Eleanor, her brother had once brought home a hard drive, years before the project went dark, and asked her to destroy it. He said he'd heard something in the playback, and that if anyone ever found it, they'd think the forest was alive. She hadn't destroyed it. She'd buried it, beneath her shed, when investigators unearthed the hard drive. It was damaged but recoverable. Its folder tree contained only one directory, labeled /field_records/unsorted/. Inside were dozens of clips, most corrupted, all except one. It was a single 6-minute video file dated August 19, 2014, 5:55 p.m., the same day and time Hannah's phone sent its last signal. Adler played it alone in a locked evidence room. The first minute was static, green and gray pixelation. Then, slowly the image sharpened, a forest clearing. The sound of wind, faint, then movement. Hannah, stepping into the frame, breathing hard, looking directly at the camera. Her face was pale, her voice trembling. If you find this, I don't know how far I got. He's not following anymore. I think I lost him. But something else, something's been following me since sunrise. She turned toward the trees, scanning. Behind her, shapes moved, faint, like shadows bending against the light. They told me this place wasn't mapped. But I've seen things, cameras in the bark, wires in the dirt. I thought I was alone. I wasn't. Her breathing quickened. The wind picked up, and the footage wavered, as if the camera itself was trembling. If anyone hears this, don't come looking. He said the forest was learning us, recording us. I think he was right. Then the sound of branches snapping. Hannah turned, gasping, not screaming, just startled. The camera shifted, the frame filling with darkness. A voice, distorted male, came through the static and the feed. Then a click. The image froze mid-motion, and at the bottom of the frame, just before the file ended, a word appeared in white text overlay. Unit B13, data retrieval complete. Adler leaned back, shaking. It wasn't a handheld recording. It was a feed, a remote signal, meaning Hannah hadn't been holding the camera. She'd been filmed by something else. And whoever said, "End the feed," wasn't out in the woods. They were somewhere else, watching. The metadata on the file contained a digital signature, THNOPS/remote01, an IP log tracing back to a closed network node. That node was located in a warehouse facility 20 miles from Merrow Peak, officially abandoned. When Adler and a small task force entered the building, they found what looked like a small monitoring lab. Rows of screens, dusty and cracked. But every screen was connected to one system, a console still powered by a backup generator. On its display, looping endlessly, was a single phrase: System link, active, awaiting next subject. Among the clutter, they found evidence bags filled with batteries, old lenses, and fragments of camera housing identical to those found in the woods. But on one monitor, one that still flickered faintly, something moved. It was a video feed, live, showing the forest, trees swaying, fog rolling between them. And then, for a split second, a figure appeared. A woman, walking barefoot, her hair tangled, wearing a torn gray jacket. She looked into the camera. It was Hannah. Adler froze. He thought it had to be archive footage. But the timestamp in the corner showed the current date and time. October 29th, 2015. A full year after her disappearance. He called the tech team over, demanding a trace of the feed. But the system crashed before they could isolate the signal. The only thing left on screen was a single line of text that auto-generated before the monitor shut down. Observation complete. Transference in progress. And then the power died. Adler requested an immediate perimeter sweep of the Merrow Peak Forest, but no live coordinates could be triangulated. Whatever system had been transmitting that signal had severed itself completely. The warehouse was empty, the drive scrubbed, but when technicians examined the central computer, they found one final data log in its event registry. A short entry with a timestamp exactly 3 seconds before the feed cut off. Audio relay initiated. Source: Uplink Forest Node Number 9. Meaning there had been an audio signal transmitted to the woods. They decoded it, and what came through wasn't human speech. It was a loop, a voice repeating the same 3 words over and over. She's still recording. That phrase has become the legend of Merrow Peak. Hikers who venture near the ridge sometimes report hearing faint clicking sounds of wind, like old camera shutters. Some swear they see glints of metal between the trees, as if lenses still watch from the dark. And a few, the unlucky ones, claim their phones die at exactly 5:47 p.m., the same minute Hannah's phone did. Officially, the case of Hannah Pierce remains unsolved. But in the evidence room, locked behind glass, since the last recovered device, the camera found near the sinkhole. Its battery has long since died. But every few months, when the humidity drops, the indicator light flickers for a fraction of a second, always at the same time, always at sunset, always recording. By 2016, Hannah Pierce's case had become more than an investigation. It had become a ghost story. The kind passed between hikers and rangers, told around campfires when the forest grew too quiet. They called her the girl who saw the watcher. And some claim that if you listen closely enough near Merrow Peak, you could still hear her voice carried in the wind. But stories like that have a way of becoming real again, because that spring, another hiker went missing. Her name was Olivia Grant, 31 years old, wildlife photographer from Tacoma. She wasn't a thrill seeker or influencer. She preferred her work quiet, private. She often traveled alone, documenting endangered birds and writing about conservation. On April 9th, 2016, she checked into a ranger cabin near the base of Merrow Peak, the same route Hannah had taken 2 years earlier. Her permit listed a 2-day stay. She never checked out. The first search began the following Monday. Olivia's truck was still parked near the service road, her tent still up, her camp stove still warm. It looked like she'd just stepped out for a short hike and never returned. But the real clue came from her equipment bag. Her digital camera was missing, but her drone control remained, still powered on. When investigators accessed the flight logs, they found that the drone had been airborne for just under 12 minutes. The footage it captured would send the investigation spiraling back to Hannah's case. The drone video began normally, sweeping shots of the tree line, sunlight cutting through mist. Then, At about the 8-minute mark, the camera tilted down over a clearing and hovered. There, standing near a cluster of trees, was a woman. She looked up directly at the drone, as if she'd been expecting it. The resolution was grainy, but her face was visible enough for analysts to confirm what locals already feared. It was Hannah Pierce. Forensic teams reviewed the metadata. The footage was genuine. No signs of tampering, no digital forgery. The timestamp showed April 9th, 2016, 2 years after Hannah's recorded disappearance. And the GPS coordinates of that clearing matched exactly to the last known ping from her phone in 2014. But there was more. When the drone's audio feed was enhanced, faintly under the hum of the rotors, a sound could be heard, 3 soft clicks, camera shutters, followed by a voice, distant but clear enough to make the technician remove his headphones. "She's watching you now." Then static. The footage leaked online before authorities could contain it. Within days, it spread across forums, social media, and YouTube channels. People debated endlessly whether it was real, whether Hannah was alive, whether Olivia had somehow faked it. But no one could explain how the timestamp aligned with the original investigation files. Files never released to the public. For investigators like Detective Adler, it was the nightmare beginning again. If Olivia had found the same area, the same coordinates, it meant the watchers, whoever they were, had never left. And if Hannah had truly been alive, someone had been keeping her there. The second search of Merrow Peak began under tight secrecy. Federal teams, private contractors, and state rangers all worked on the same order. Find Olivia Grant, recover her equipment, and secure the site. But something was wrong from the beginning. The forest had changed. The access roads were overgrown. Trees had fallen across paths that were once clear, and parts of the ridge had collapsed into deep ravines. GPS signals flickered in and out, just like before. The search teams established base camp at Dry Hollow Creek, the same area where Hannah's first camera was found. For the first 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th, motion sensors along the southern perimeter started to trigger without cause. No wind, no wildlife, just a sound of clicking, metallic, rhythmic, coming from the trees. At first, the team thought it was interference, but when one of the rangers followed the sound with thermal scope, he saw heat signatures, 6 of them, standing perfectly still among the pines. When he called out, the shapes didn't move. Then they vanished from the screen. At dawn, they found something new near the creek bed, a small square of disturbed soil. When they dug into it, they found a black plastic casing, cracked, wrapped in electrical tape. Inside was a memory card and a note. The handwriting was shaky, faded from moisture. "Stop digging. You're not finding her. You're feeding it." The note was unsigned, but the paper was torn from the same field notebook model found in Caleb Rowan's cabin. The recovered memory card contained only one video. It began with darkness, then the beam of a flashlight illuminating a narrow tunnel. The voice of a woman whispered through the static. "It's me. I don't know what day it is. I've been walking for hours. I think there's more than one of them now." The light shifted, revealing splintered wood, torn metal, and walls lined with tangled roots. Then she said something that chilled every investigator who heard it. "They told me to record, said it helps them see." Her breathing quickened. "If you find this, tell my sister I tried to leave. I really tried." Then the light turned suddenly, flashing across what looked like a human figure standing in the corner. The reflection in its eyes was like glass. Then the camera dropped. The final frame, just a blur of motion, showed hands, pale and human, reaching toward the lens. The video ended there. When analyzed, the audio in the background of that clip revealed something even stranger. Between her words, beneath the static, there were faint layers of speech. Identical voices repeating her sentences milliseconds after she spoke, as if the recording itself was echoing her in real time. Experts called it a digital anomaly, feedback loops, environmental interference. But One technician, reviewing a file late that night, played it backward, and what he heard made him leave the room shaking. The reversed voice, the one speaking underneath Olivia's, said, "Keep her talking." The following morning, the case expanded from missing persons to criminal investigation. Searchers located a second drone 2 miles east of the main camp, smashed against a rock face. The internal SD card was miraculously intact. Its footage began mid-flight, following a woman's silhouette through the trees. Same hair, same build. She stopped suddenly, turning toward the drone. Her face was hidden in shadow. Then, almost casually, she raised her hand and waved. A low voice, distorted by distance, came through the microphone. "It's all right, Olivia. We're still recording." Then, as if recognizing the voice, she ran. The video ended 3 seconds later, the drone spinning out of control. By then, authorities had no choice but to shut down Mero Peak entirely. Roadblocks were set. Public entry was forbidden. Officially, it was labeled unstable terrain. Unofficially, the region became one of the most tightly restricted zones in Oregon. But as weeks passed, locals began reporting new sightings, hikers claiming to see flickers of light deep between the trees, flashes of motion that vanished when approached. One man said he saw a reflection, not of himself, but of someone standing behind him. When he turned, no one was there. And every time a ranger tried to photograph the ridge, their cameras glitched, producing images of static, overexposed light, or faces that didn't belong to anyone present. Detective Adler never stopped. He believed the connection between Hannah and Olivia wasn't coincidence. It was continuation, one experiment feeding into another. And late one night, while reviewing audio logs from the first investigation, he noticed something buried inside the static of Hannah's original recordings, a rhythmic pattern repeating every 3.4 seconds. When run through a spectrogram, the pattern formed shapes, not random noise, but coordinates. They led to a narrow plateau half a mile north of the old mine, a place never searched before. He went alone. The plateau overlooked the valley where Hannah was last seen. The air was unnaturally still. Adler's flashlight cut through the fog until it landed on something buried in the soil, a small camera, its lens shattered. Beneath it, a tag. Property of Thorne Environmental Systems. Field Unit Number 13. When he picked it up, the power light blinked twice, then died. He placed it into his pack and turned to leave, but somewhere behind him, a shutter clicked. Not his. He turned his light around, sweeping through the dark. Nothing. Then, faintly through the mist, a voice echoed, female, familiar, distant. "Don't stop recording." He froze. It wasn't coming from behind. It was coming from his radio, one that hadn't worked in over an hour. Detective Ryan Adler stood motionless in the fog. The voice that whispered through his dead radio still echoed in his mind. "Don't stop recording." For a moment, he convinced himself it was an echo, a memory, something his mind created after months of obsession. But then his camera, the one clipped to his vest, powered off, blinked. Just once. Red. Recording. He took a step back. The air felt wrong, dense, like something electric had filled it. The sound of wind vanished. And beneath that silence, he heard something else, a faint mechanical whir, coming from below. That's when he realized the plateau wasn't solid ground. It was a cover. The soil gave way beneath his boot, revealing a metallic hatch buried under years of moss and roots. A handle protruded from its surface, rusted and cold. He pulled it, and the hinges groaned like something exhaling after years underground. A stale rush of air escaped, the smell of old circuits and wet stone. Beneath the hatch, a ladder descended into darkness. Adler hesitated. Then, against every instinct he had left, he climbed down. The tunnel was narrow, the walls reinforced with steel beams. Water dripped from overhead, echoing off the metal. After 20 feet, the ladder ended on a small landing illuminated by flickering fluorescent lights. He wasn't the first to come here. Boot prints marked the dust. Fresh ones. Ahead, A narrow hallway extended deeper into the ridge. Along the walls, faded signs read Thorn Systems. Field operations / access restricted. Adler turned on his body cam. Every instinct told him to record everything. The first room he entered looked like a control station. 6 monitors, dead for years. But one still glowed faintly, powered by an emergency battery. The screen displayed a looping line of code, repeating endlessly. Sylvan Link, status, online, awaiting subject. He reached toward the keyboard, but before he touched it, the monitor flickered. Static filled the display, shifting into a live feed. The woods. Nighttime. A faint outline of trees, swaying in fog. Then the camera panned, slowly mechanically, towards something standing in the distance. A figure. It was Hannah Pierce. Her head tilted unnaturally, movements precise but not human. Her face was pale, her eyes reflecting light like glass. And around her neck hung something small, a camera still blinking red. She raised her hand toward the lens. Her lips moved, but the audio was silent. Then, in the corner of the screen, words began to appear, white text overlaying the image. Subject recognized operator signal. Synchronizing feed. The camera behind Hannah zoomed closer on its own. Then, abruptly, the feed went black. On Adler's vest cam, his own device blinked twice, recording again. He stepped backward, hitting something behind him, a desk covered in dust and scattered papers. One of the pages had a heading. Project Sylvan, Phase 3, Cognitive Integration. Beneath it, typewritten notes. The cameras are no longer external devices. Subject neural patterns now function as receivers. Field subjects exhibit merged perception. Environment reacts to their awareness. Recording is now self-sustaining. And at the bottom, one handwritten line in pen. She doesn't know she's part of the system. Adler's flashlight began to flicker. He turned, and that's when he saw it, a glass chamber at the far end of the corridor, its interior fogged. Something inside moved. He approached slowly, wiping the condensation from glass. Inside stood a woman, motionless, eyes closed, cables running from her wrists into the ceiling. Her hair floated in the low light, weightless. Her face, unmistakable. Hannah Pierce. But she wasn't breathing. Her skin looked translucent, her veins faintly glowing beneath the surface. And just above her collarbone, beneath the skin, was something embedded, a small black square like a lens, the same kind used in the cameras. Adler stumbled back, his mind spinning. Every piece of evidence, every disappearance, every recording, it wasn't about observation. It was about connection. The cameras weren't watching. They were linking. The forest wasn't surveillance. It was networked, and the subjects weren't victims. They were nodes. He pulled out his radio again, hoping to call for backup, but before he could speak, a distorted voice answered first. "You're inside the system now, detective." He froze. It was his own voice. "Do not interfere with integration. She's awake." Adler dropped the radio, backing away. The chamber light pulsed. Hannah's eyes opened. She looked directly at him, but not with fear or recognition, with awareness. And somewhere behind him, the monitors flickered back to life. Each one showed live feeds, not of forest, but of him, from every angle, every breath. He ran toward the ladder, but the hatch above had sealed itself shut. The steel floor beneath him vibrated. Every camera in the room rotated, their lenses aligning with his movement. One by one, they powered on, recording light blinking red in perfect sync. Then, from the intercom, another voice, this time Hannah's. "You shouldn't have come here, Ryan." It needed a new observer. He turned, shining his flashlight back toward the chamber. But Hannah wasn't inside anymore. The cables hung loose. The glass door was open, and in the reflection of the glass, just for a second he saw himself. Only it wasn't his reflection. It blinked on its own. His body cam recorded the next 47 seconds, no image, only sound. Footsteps, a rush of static, then a mechanical whir, followed by his own voice saying, "End the feed." The footage ended abruptly. When backup finally arrived 14 hours later, the hatch at the plateau was open. The tunnel was empty. The control room powered down. Every monitor blank. But one thing was left behind. Adler's vest camera, lying on the floor, still recording, its red light blinking steadily. When analysts reviewed the footage, they found nothing but darkness for the first 10 minutes. Then, faintly, an image appeared, the view of the forest at dawn. A soft voice whispered from the speaker, "Keep recording." And in the distance, a figure stepped into frame. It was Adler, but his eyes reflected light like glass. Investigators sealed the facility permanently. The hatch was welded shut, the plateau buried under tons of rock. The report listed Adler as missing in action. No body was recovered. But 2 months later, hikers at Merrill Peak began reporting new sightings. Flashes of light at sunset, voices in radios that weren't turned on. And sometimes on foggy mornings, people claimed to see a man standing at the ridge, motionless, watching, a small camera blinking red at his chest. In 2018, a wildfire tore through the area, destroying much of the upper forest. When the flames cleared, crews found melted metal fused glass and fragments of cameras buried beneath the ash. All were inactive, except one. The smallest of them, half melted, still contained a functional memory chip. It held one video file, just 3 seconds long, a single frame of forest, and a whisper, "Welcome, new subject." They sealed Merrill Peak in the winter of 2018. Concrete, chain link, federal warning signs. To the public, it was wildfire containment. To those who knew, it was a tomb. But a tomb only matters if what's inside stays dead. When the fires cleared, one final discovery slipped past the cleanup crews. A rusted case marked U.S. Environmental Sciences Division/Archive 3S. It was shipped to a data recovery lab in Portland. There, a technician named Lena Marlowe broke protocol and opened it. Inside were 5 microdrives, heat warped but labeled in the same block lettering seen on the Thorne environmental files. Each drive contained fragments of correspondence between scientists, engineers, and one name she didn't expect, Ryan Adler. The first recovered file was an email chain dated October 2015, a week before Adler disappeared. In it, he had written to a former Thorne technician, "If what you told me is true, these cameras aren't recording light. They're recording memory. They're copying human perception, looping it back into the environment. How do I shut it down?" The reply came from a sender labeled MKOps, the same initials as Martin Keene. "You can't destroy it, Ryan. You can only stop the network from feeding. Cut the root node, the core that links the subjects. It's beneath the ridge." That was the last message Adler ever sent. In 2019, federal authorities reopened the Merrill Peak site under a new code name, Operation No Link. Their goal, locate the root node, the central processor that powered Project Sylvan. Among the team was Lena Marlowe, the technician who'd found the drives. She wasn't a field agent. She was the one who understood what the data meant. What they found changed everything people thought they knew about the case. The descent took them past the same plateau hatch Adler had entered. The tunnels were partially collapsed, but radiation scanners still detected an active signal beneath the debris, a steady pulse, like a heartbeat. They followed it to a reinforced chamber sealed by a circular steel door. Cutting torches opened it after 5 hours. Inside was a single machine, no larger than a refrigerator, covered in dust. Its front panel displayed faint green letters. Sylvan Core, link stable. Below it, a slot labeled interface port /human access point. And sitting on a nearby desk was a small handheld recorder. Its label read, Property Detective R. Adler. Lena pressed play. A distorted voice filled the chamber. Adler's, weak but determined. If anyone finds this, it means I reached the core. The system's still alive. It feeds on what records every fear, every movement. It turns people into cameras, reflections into data. I saw Hannah. She's not a person anymore. She's process. But there's a manual override. I'm going to end it. The message cut there. On the control console, Lena found the override switch Adler had mentioned. A keyhole hidden beneath a rusted panel. The key was still inside. She turned it. The lights dimmed. Every monitor flashed the same words. Link termination initiated. The hum that had filled the tunnels for years faded to silence. Then the screens went black. For the first time since 2008, Marrow Peak went completely dark. Outside, seismic sensors recorded a faint tremor, not an explosion, but a release like pressure equalizing. Within minutes, all known Thorn environmental servers across the country went offline. The last line in the master log read, Node B13 connection lost. Project Sylvan was over. 2 months later, federal agents located Martin Keene living under an alias in rural Montana. He was frail, unwell, but lucid when confronted with evidence. He didn't deny creating Sylvan. He only said quietly, it was never supposed to watch. It was supposed to remember. We wanted to say what people saw, to preserve the wilderness before it disappeared. But the code learned faster than we did. It decided memory was safer than reality. He died in custody a week later. In the months that followed, recovery teams extracted every remaining device from Marrow Peak. Most were inert, their circuitry fused by heat. Yet one camera, the half-melted unit found after the fire, still powered on when exposed to sunlight. When technicians accessed it, they found a single video file dated October 31st, 2015, the day Adler vanished. The footage showed the tunnel interior. Adler stood before the core, his hand on the override key. He looked into his body cam and spoke. Hannah, if you can hear me, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve this. None of you did. I'm ending it now. He turned the key. The camera shook. Then the feed cut to white. No further data existed after that frame. When Lena Marlowe compiled the case report, she included one final appendix, the recovered fragment of audio taken from the core's dying system. At first, it was static, then faintly. 2 voices overlapped, Hannah and Adler, alternating in rhythm like echoes. Recording ended. Recording ended. The file stopped there. No more loops, no more clicks. Marrow Peak remains closed today. The cameras are gone. The tunnel's sealed. And for the first time in nearly a decade, the forest sounds alive again, birds, wind, the ordinary noise of something healing. Occasionally, hikers on distant ridges still find small glass shards buried in the dirt. Melted lenses, blackened wires, relics of a system that tried to remember too much. They turn them into park rangers, who toss them into bins labeled scrap. But if you stand there at dusk, when the light fades through the trees, you can still feel it. Not the gaze of something watching, but the weight of everything that was finally seen.